Hospital rejected black mom and her sick baby, but a passing billionaire did the unimaginable. A desperate black mother rushes into the emergency room, holding her sick baby, begging for help. But instead of care, she gets turned away. No bed, no urgency, no mercy. As night falls, she prepares to sleep on the cold hospital floor, praying her baby will survive until morning. That's when a quiet, broken old man sitting nearby hears everything. He doesn't look powerful. He doesn't look rich. But when another hospital rejects them too, he makes a decision no one sees coming. One phone call, one impossible move, and suddenly the rules no longer apply. Doctors panic, hospitals scramble, and a secret about this man begins to surface, one that could change everything. But just when hope finally arrives, a new danger threatens to destroy them all. Will a baby's life be saved in time, and what price will this mysterious stranger have to pay for doing the right thing? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The first sign something was wrong came just before sunset. Violet stood in the small kitchen of her apartment, stirring a thin pot of soup, when she heard Benjamin's cry change. It was not the sharp cry of hunger or the quick fuss of a tired baby. This cry was weak, broken. It sounded like it had to fight its way out of his chest. She turned fast, heart jumping. Benjamin lay in his crib near the window, his tiny fists curled tight against his body. His face was red, too red. Sweat dampened his curls, making them stick to his forehead. Violet touched his cheek, then his neck. Her breath caught. He was burning up. "Oh no," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. "No, baby, please." She pressed her lips to his head and felt the heat there too. Benjamin whimpered and turned his face into her shoulder, his breath short and uneven. Violet rocked him, moving back and forth the way she always did, but the fear would not leave her chest. She checked the clock on the wall. Almost 6. All day she had told herself he was just fussy, just tired. Babies got warm sometimes, babies cried, but now she knew better. A mother always did. Violet carried Benjamin to the couch and sat down, holding him close. She closed her eyes and prayed, the way she had learned to do as a child. "Please, Lord," she said softly, "help me know what to do." Her apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old fridge and Benjamin's uneven breathing. The place was small, just one bedroom, a couch with worn arms, and a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. It was not much, but it was home, and right now it felt very far from safe. Violet reached for her phone and checked her bank balance. The number stared back at her, small and unforgiving. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her next paycheck would barely cover groceries. She swallowed and looked down at Benjamin. Money did not matter. Not tonight. She wrapped him in his soft blue blanket, grabbed her jacket, and slung her purse over her shoulder. As she locked the door behind her, her hands shook. Outside, the sky was fading from orange to grey. The air was cool, sharp against her skin. Violet walked fast to the bus stop, her steps uneven as she adjusted Benjamin in her arms. Every few seconds, she leaned down to check his face. "Hang on, baby," she murmured. "Mama's got you." The bus ride felt too long. Every stop made her chest tighten. Benjamin's cries grew softer, and that scared her more than if he had been screaming. She rubbed his back, whispering prayers into his hair, as strangers stared and then looked away. When they finally reached the hospital, the building rose in front of her like a block of white stone. Bright lights glared from the windows. People moved in and out through sliding doors, some walking, some wheeled on stretchers. Violet took a deep breath and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, clean, sharp, and cold. The emergency room buzzed with noise, phones ringing, machines beeping, voices calling names. Violet walked up to the front desk, holding Benjamin out slightly so the woman behind the counter could see him. "My baby's sick," Violet said. "He has a fever. He's breathing funny." The woman glanced at Benjamin, then at Violet. Her face stayed flat. "Name?" Violet gave it. The woman typed, clicked, then asked for insurance. I don't have much," Violet said. "But he needs help, please." The woman sighed, like Violet had asked something unreasonable. "You'll need to wait. We're very busy." "How long?" Violet asked, her voice tight. The woman shrugged. "Could be hours." Violet looked around. Some people sat slumped in chairs. Others leaned against walls. A man groaned softly nearby. Violet nodded and moved to the waiting area, her heart heavy. She sat. She waited. Minutes passed. Then more. Violet stood once to check on Benjamin, then sat again. She walked back to the desk after what felt like forever. "Excuse me," she said. "My baby is getting worse." The woman looked annoyed. "We'll call you when it's your turn." "But, Mom," the woman said, cutting her off. "Please sit down." Violet returned to her chair, her hands shaking now. Benjamin's breathing was faster. His skin felt even hotter. Time stretched. The lights overhead stayed harsh and bright. Violet watched names get called. People who arrived after her stood and disappeared through the double doors. No one said her name. At last, she stood again, this time walking toward a nurse passing by. "Please," Violet said. "I think something is really wrong." The nurse glanced at Benjamin, then back at Violet. "What's his temperature?" "I don't know. I don't have a thermometer." The nurse nodded, already turning away. "He'll be seen when a doctor is free." "But he's just a baby," Violet said, her voice breaking. The nurse paused. For a moment, Violet thought she saw something like pity. Then it was gone. "I'm sorry," the nurse said. "We're full." The words hit Violet harder than she expected. Full! She returned to her chair, tears burning her eyes. She pressed her forehead to Benjamin's head and rocked him, back and forth, back and forth. Hours passed. Night settled outside, thick and dark. Violet's arms ached. Her eyes burned from staying open too long. Finally, a man in a white coat approached her. Relief flooded her chest. But his words crushed it again. "There are no beds," he said. "You'll need to take him home and monitor him. Give him fluids. If it gets worse, come back." Violet stared at him. "It is worse," she said. "Please, I'm begging you." The doctor's face stayed calm, distant. "We've done all we can right now." He turned and walked away. Violet sat there for a long moment, unable to move. Around her, the emergency room carried on as if nothing had happened, as if her world had not just cracked open. Slowly, she slid down from the chair to the floor. She laid her jacket beneath Benjamin and curled around him, shielding him from the cold tiles. "I'm here," she whispered, tears finally falling. "I'm here." She prayed again, not for miracles, just for help. She did not notice the older man sitting a few chairs away. He had been there for some time, quiet and still, watching the room with tired eyes. But he noticed her. He noticed the way she held her baby, the way she whispered comfort even as her own heart broke. And he listened. And for the first time that night, someone truly saw them. The floor was colder than Violet expected. Even through her jacket, the chill seeped into her knees and back. The hard tiles pressed against her bones. But she did not care about comfort. She cared about the tiny bundle against her chest. Benjamin's body stayed hot, like a little stove that would not turn off. His breath came in short bursts, as if every inhale took effort. Violet kept one hand on his back, feeling each rise and fall, counting them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. She did not know how long she stayed curled there. Time had turned strange in the emergency room. The lights never dimmed. The sounds never stopped. People came and went like waves, but Violet stayed stuck in one place, like a rock on the shore. A security guard walked by once and glanced at her. Violet held her breath, waiting for him to tell her to get up, to move, to leave. He only looked away and kept walking. That almost hurt more. Violet lifted her head and looked toward the front desk. The same clerk sat there, tapping at a keyboard. A nurse passed behind her with a clipboard. Violet's mouth tasted dry. She could not just sit here, not while her baby struggled. With careful movements, she rose to her feet. Her legs wobbled from being cramped so long. She adjusted Benjamin in her arms, wrapping the blue blanket tighter around him, and walked back to the desk. "Mom," Violet said, keeping her voice as calm as she could. "Please. My baby is breathing worse. I need someone to look at him." The clerk did not even look up right away. When she finally did, her eyes slid over Violet like Violet was part of the furniture. "I told you," the clerk said. "We're busy." Violet swallowed. "I understand, but he's a baby. He's burning up." "Did you have an appointment?" the clerk asked. Violet stared at her. "An appointment? This is the emergency room." The clerk's lips tightened. "Insurance?" "I don't have—" Violet began, but her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I don't have good insurance, but I can pay something. I'll figure it out. Please, just help him." The clerk gave a tired sigh, like Violet was making her night harder on purpose. "Sit down," she said. "If it's an emergency, they'll get to you." Violet wanted to scream. She wanted to slam her hands on the counter. She wanted to shout that this was an emergency, that her baby was not a number on a screen. Instead, she nodded. Because she had learned long ago that anger did not help people like her. Anger made them label her. Anger made them call security. Anger made them stop listening. So she swallowed it. Violet returned to the waiting area, feeling like she was walking through mud. She sat in the same chair and rocked Benjamin again. "Stay with me," she whispered into his hair. "Please, baby, please." A man across from her coughed hard into his elbow. A young woman scrolled on her phone with a bored face. Somewhere behind the double doors, someone yelled for a doctor. The room kept moving. Violet stayed stuck. She checked her phone. 2:17 a.m. Her eyes stung. Her shoulders ached. Her arms felt numb from holding Benjamin so long, but she did not dare put him down. When she shifted her grip, Benjamin gave a thin whimper, and Violet's heart jumped. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Mama's here." She stood and walked again, this time toward the doorway where nurses went in and out. She waited until a nurse stepped out, someone different, someone she had not begged yet. "Excuse me," Violet said quickly. "I'm sorry, I know you're busy, but my baby is very sick." The nurse paused. She was in her late 30s, hair pulled back tight, dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired in a way Violet understood. Tired like life was heavy. The nurse glanced at Benjamin and frowned slightly. "How long has he had a fever?" "Since earlier today," Violet said. "But now he's breathing fast and he won't really cry. He's just fading." The nurse reached out and touched Benjamin's forehead with 2 fingers. Her brows pulled together for a second. Then her face smoothed out, again, like she pushed something down. "Have you given him anything?" the nurse asked. "I gave him baby fever medicine," Violet said quickly. "The only kind I had. It didn't help." The nurse nodded, looking toward the back. Violet leaned forward, hope rising like a spark. "Can you please take him now? Just check him, please?" The nurse's eyes flicked back to Violet. She looked at Violet's worn shoes, her cheap jacket, the tired face that belonged to a woman who had carried too much alone. "I'm sorry," the nurse said. "We're full. There are people back there waiting too." Violet's hope dropped like a stone. "But you felt his head," Violet said, voice shaking. "You know he's hot." The nurse's jaw tightened. She lowered her voice. "You need to go back to your seat." Violet stared at her, stunned. "So you want me to just watch my baby get worse?" The nurse's eyes hardened. "Mom, don't make this harder. Go sit down." Violet stepped back like she had been slapped. She walked away slowly, tears blurring her vision. She returned to a chair and sank into it, clutching Benjamin like he was the only thing keeping her standing. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice from years ago. "Baby, the world will test you, but you hold on to the Lord because He sees you even when people don't." Violet squeezed her eyes shut and breathed through the pain. "God," she whispered, "I don't know what to do." Benjamin's breath rattled softly. Violet pressed her ear to his chest and listened. His heartbeat was fast. Too fast. She thought of calling an ambulance, then remembered she was already here. She thought of another hospital, then imagined being turned away again. The fear grew bigger until it filled her whole body. A soft voice broke through it. "Mom?" Violet lifted her head. An older man sat a few chairs away. She had noticed him before, but only in the way you noticed someone sitting quietly, minding their own business. Now she saw him clearly. He looked to be in his late 50s. His hair was grey at the temples. His face was lined, not from age alone, but from stress. He wore a plain jacket and simple shoes. Nothing about him stood out, except his eyes. They were kind but heavy, like they had seen too much. "Yes?" Violet asked, her voice hoarse. The man leaned forward slightly. "How old is your baby?" Violet hesitated. She did not owe a stranger anything, but something about his tone felt gentle, not nosy. 8 months, she said quietly. He nodded and looked at Benjamin. His gaze softened. "He doesn't look well." Violet's throat tightened. "No," she whispered. "He's not. And they won't help him." The man's mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked around the room, as if seeing it differently now. Then he looked back at Violet. "Have you been waiting long?" he asked. "Since evening," Violet said. "They told me there were no beds. They told me to go home." The man's eyes narrowed, not in anger at Violet, in anger at something bigger. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Those 2 words hit Violet hard, not because they fixed anything, but because no one else had said them. No one else had offered even that small kindness. Violet blinked quickly, wiping tears off her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, voice small. "I don't have family here. I don't have anyone." The man nodded like he understood. He shifted in his seat, moving carefully, like his body hurt. Violet noticed then that he looked pale, almost sick himself. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his jacket. "Is there another hospital nearby?" he asked. "There is one," Violet said, "but it's farther. I don't have a car." The man looked down for a moment, thinking. Then he lifted his gaze. "I do," he said. Violet stared at him. "You do?" He nodded once. "I can drive you." Violet's heart beat faster. Her first instinct was to say no. Her mother had taught her to be careful. The world was not safe, especially for women alone at night, especially for black women, especially with a baby in their arms. But Benjamin made a small sound, thin, tired, and Violet's fear shifted. This was not about safety from strangers. This was about losing her child. She looked into the man's eyes again. They were steady, not pushy, not demanding, just offering. "You don't even know me," Violet said. "I don't need to," he replied. "You're a mother trying to save your baby." Violet swallowed hard. "Why would you help?" The man's gaze dropped, just for a second, like something inside him hurt. "Because someone should," he said. Violet felt the tears rise again. She held Benjamin tighter. Outside the big windows, the night was still dark. Streetlights glowed like distant stars. Violet hesitated, caught between fear and hope. The man waited. He did not rush her. Finally, Violet nodded, barely able to speak. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The man stood slowly, as if his joints were stiff. He reached into his pocket and pulled out keys. "This way," he said. Violet rose, legs shaky, and followed him toward the sliding doors. With each step, her heart pounded. She did not know who this man was. She did not know what was ahead. But for the first time that night, Violet was not alone in the fight. And that small shift, one stranger standing up, felt like the first crack of dawn breaking through the dark. The cool night air wrapped around Violet the moment the hospital doors slid shut behind them. She held Benjamin close, shielding his face from the breeze as the older man led her across the parking lot. The lights above buzzed softly. A few cars sat scattered across the asphalt, their windows dark. Everything felt quiet in a way that made Violet's nerves stretch tight. The man's car was an older sedan, clean but plain. He opened the back door for Violet without a word, giving her space. She climbed in carefully and settled Benjamin against her chest. The seat was cool, but she was grateful to be sitting. The man got in the driver's seat and started the engine. It hummed low and steady. "Thank you," Violet said, her voice barely louder than the engine. He nodded once. "You're welcome." They pulled out of the lot and onto the road. Streetlights passed in slow rhythm, lighting the inside of the car in brief flashes. Violet watched the man's hands on the wheel. They looked strong, but tired. His knuckles were pale, his grip firm. "My name is—" Violet began, then stopped herself. She remembered what he had said earlier. Names did not matter right now. "How far is the other hospital?" he asked. "About 20 minutes. Violet said, "Maybe more this time of night." "That's fine," he replied. Benjamin stirred, letting out a small sound that made Violet's chest tighten. She rubbed his back gently. "He's been sick before," she said quietly, more to herself than to the man. "But never like this." The man glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes softened. "You're doing everything you can," he said. Violet nodded, though doubt pressed hard against her ribs. "It doesn't feel like enough." They drove in silence for a while. The city slipped by outside, dark buildings and closed shops, empty sidewalks. Violet's mind raced with fear. What if the other hospital said no too? What if Benjamin stopped breathing in the car? She leaned her head down and whispered prayers into his blanket. "Please," she murmured, "please let us get there in time." The car slowed as they reached a red light. The man's foot pressed the brake. His face tightened for a second, like he was in pain. Violet noticed his shallow breathing, the way his shoulders rose and fell too quickly. "Are you okay?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "I will be." Violet wanted to ask more, but she did not. Everyone carried something. Tonight they were carrying each other. The second hospital appeared ahead, its bright sign glowing against the dark sky. Violet's heart lifted just a little. They pulled into the emergency entrance. The man parked and rushed around to open Violet's door. She stepped out quickly. Benjamin clutched tight. Inside, the air felt the same as the first hospital, cold, sharp, and busy. Violet went straight to the desk, her voice urgent. "My baby is very sick," she said. "He has a high fever and trouble breathing." The clerk here looked younger. She glanced at Benjamin, then at Violet, then at the man standing behind her. "Insurance?" the clerk asked. Violet's shoulders sank. "I don't have much," she said. "But please." The clerk shook her head. "We're on diversion. No beds." Violet felt the room tilt. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't take him," the clerk said flatly. "You'll need to go somewhere else." Violet's knees weakened. She clutched the counter to stay upright. "He's a baby," she said. Her voice sounded far away. "He's getting worse." "I'm sorry," the clerk replied, already looking past her. "There's nothing we can do." Violet turned slowly. The man stood very still, his jaw tight. His eyes were fixed on the clerk, not with anger, but with something colder. Outside, Violet sank onto a bench near the entrance. The night air felt heavier now. Benjamin whimpered weakly. "I can't," Violet whispered. "I can't do this again." Tears streamed down her face. She rocked back and forth, her body folding inward around her child. "I'm losing him," she said. "I know I am." The man crouched in front of her, moving carefully like his body protested the effort. He placed one hand on the bench, steadying himself. "Listen to me," he said gently. "You're not losing him. Not tonight." Violet looked up, eyes red and swollen. "They won't help us. No one will." The man held her gaze. His voice stayed calm, but something fierce lived underneath it. "Then we'll make someone help," he said. Violet frowned. "How?" The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment, like he was bracing himself. "I need you to trust me," he said. Violet hesitated. She had already trusted him once. She had followed him into the dark. Now she had nothing left but that trust. "I don't have any other choice," she whispered. The man nodded. "I know." He stepped away and turned his back slightly, phone pressed to his ear. Violet could hear his low voice, steady but urgent. "I need a mobile unit," he said. "Fully staffed. Pediatric capable. Now." Violet's heart skipped. She strained to hear more, but his words were clipped, careful. "Yes," he continued. "I'll cover everything. No delays." He paused, listening. His shoulders sagged slightly, like the weight of the world pressed down on him. "I understand the risks," he said. "Send it anyway." He ended the call and turned back to Violet. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man met her eyes. "I called in a favor," he said quietly. "One I hoped I'd never have to use again." Violet stared at him. "What kind of favor brings doctors to a parking lot?" The man looked past her, out into the night. "The kind that costs everything," he said. Sirens sounded in the distance. Faint at first, then louder. Violet's breath caught. The man looked back at her. "Help is coming." As flashing lights appeared at the far end of the road, Violet held Benjamin tighter than ever. She did not know who this man truly was, but she knew one thing. Whatever he had just done, it was impossible. And it might be the only thing standing between her baby and goodbye. The sirens grew louder with every passing second. Violet stood up slowly, her legs shaking as she watched the lights approach. Red, blue, white. They cut through the dark like something unreal, like a scene from a movie that could not possibly be about her life. Benjamin stirred against her chest. She whispered his name again and again, her voice trembling. "It's okay, baby," she said, Help is coming. Just hold on." The older man stood beside her, one hand braced against the bench, as if he needed the support. His face looked pale under the harsh lights outside the hospital. Sweat glistened at his temple, but his eyes stayed sharp, focused on the road. Within minutes, a large mobile medical unit pulled into the emergency lane. It was bigger than an ambulance, bright white, with equipment built into its sides. A second vehicle followed, then another. Doors opened. People moved fast. Doctors, nurses, techs. They stepped out with purpose, speaking in short, clear commands. One of them spotted Violet immediately. "Is this the infant?" the doctor asked. "Yes," Violet said quickly, stepping forward. "Please, he's very sick." They did not ask for insurance. They did not ask her to wait. They waved her toward the unit. "Bring him inside," the doctor said. "Now." Violet climbed the steps, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. The inside of the unit was bright and clean, filled with machines that hummed and blinked. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. They placed Benjamin on a small bed and began working right away. A nurse checked his temperature. Another clipped a small device to his finger. A doctor listened to his chest. Violet stood frozen, hands clenched together, afraid to breathe. "He's burning up," the nurse said. "Breathing is labored," another added. The lead doctor turned to Violet. "We need to run tests and start treatment immediately." "Do whatever you need," Violet said, her voice breaking. "Please." The doctor nodded and turned back to the team. Violet stepped back as they moved around Benjamin with quick, sure hands. She watched them place tubes and wires, her stomach twisting. Every beep from a machine felt like a hammer against her chest. Outside the unit, the older man leaned heavily against the side of the vehicle. He pressed a hand to his chest, breathing slow and shallow. One of the nurses noticed him. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," he said quietly. She studied his face, then nodded, sensing she would get no more from him. Inside, the doctor turned back to Violet. "Your baby needs immediate care," he said. "We believe there's an infection. If we don't act now, it could become very serious." Violet's knees nearly buckled. "Can you save him?" The doctor met her eyes. "We're going to try, and we're not going to stop." Tears spilled down Violet's face. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. They asked her to sit just outside the treatment area. Violet obeyed, her hands shaking as she lowered herself into a chair. She could still see Benjamin through the open doorway. That was all that mattered. Minutes crawled by. Then more. Violet prayed with every breath. Outside, hospital staff from the building gathered at a distance, watching in confusion. Phones came out, voices whispered, "Who authorized this?" Someone asked. "I don't know." Another replied, "This isn't normal." The older man stood apart from them all, silent. His phone buzzed again and again in his pocket. He did not answer. At last, the lead doctor stepped out. Violet shot to her feet. "Please," she said, "tell me something." The doctor smiled gently. "He's responding," he said. "It's early, but his fever is coming down." Violet gasped and covered her face with her hands. A sound escaped her that was half sob, half laugh. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The doctor nodded. "We need to keep him under close watch for a while longer. But you did the right thing bringing him here." Violet nodded over and over, unable to speak. She turned and looked for the older man. He stood near the edge of the parking lot, staring at the ground like the weight of the night had finally caught up to him. Violet walked toward him slowly. "They're helping him," she said softly. "He's going to be okay." The man let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. His shoulders sagged. "That's good," he said. His voice sounded rough. Violet studied him more closely now. In the glow of the lights, she could see how tired he looked, how thin, how worn down. "You saved my son," she said. He shook his head. "No, I just made a call." Violet frowned. "No," she said firmly. "You did more than that." Before he could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Who's in charge here?" A group of hospital administrators approached, their faces tight with anger and worry. One of them pointed at the mobile unit. "This was not authorized," the man said. "You can't just bring a medical unit onto hospital property." The older man stepped forward, his posture straight despite the strain. "I authorized it," he said calmly. The administrator scoffed. "And who are you supposed to be?" For a moment, the older man said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded card. He handed it over. The administrator glanced at it. His face changed, just slightly, just enough. He looked up again, eyes wide with recognition. Violet did not see the card. She did not know what it said. But she saw the shift, and in that moment, Violet understood something important. This man was not just kind, he was powerful. And whatever he had risked tonight, it was far from over. The air felt tighter after that. Violet stood a few steps away, holding her arms around herself as the hospital administrators whispered among themselves. She could not hear their words, but she could see their faces. Confusion, worry, fear. Not for her, not for Benjamin, for themselves. The older man took the card back and slipped it into his jacket as if it meant nothing. His shoulders were squared, his voice steady, but Violet noticed the way his hand trembled slightly afterward. "This is private property," one administrator said. "You can't just—" "My lawyers can speak with yours," the man replied calmly. "Right now, my concern is the child." The administrator opened his mouth, then closed it again. He glanced toward the mobile unit, where doctors continued to move with quiet urgency. "We'll be reviewing this," he said sharply. "I expect you will," the man said. The group walked away, their steps stiff. Phones came out, calls were made. Violet watched them go, her heart pounding again. She turned back toward the unit. Through the open door she saw Benjamin lying still, tiny chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Tubes and wires surrounded him, but his face looked calmer, less strained. Relief washed over her so hard her legs nearly gave out. She sat down on the curb and pressed her palms to the cool concrete. Tears fell freely now, no longer held back by fear alone. A nurse stepped outside and handed her a small cup of water. "Drink," the nurse said gently. Violet nodded and took a sip. Her hands shook. Is he really okay?" Violet asked. "He's stable," the nurse said. "We caught it in time. Another hour or two and it could have gone very differently." Violet closed her eyes. Her whole body sagged. "Thank you," she whispered. The nurse smiled softly. "You fought for him. That matters." The nurse returned inside, leaving Violet alone again with the older man. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, moving slowly, carefully. "I'm sorry you had to see all that," he said, gesturing toward the administrators' retreating backs. Violet wiped her cheeks. "I don't care about them," she said. "I care about my son." He nodded. "As you should." They sat in silence for a moment. The sky was starting to lighten at the edges, the dark blue softening into grey. Violet finally turned to him. "I don't even know your name," she said. He hesitated. "Names have a way of changing how people see you. I already see you," Violet said quietly. "You're the man who didn't walk away." The words seemed to hit him harder than any accusation. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't always that man, he said. Violet waited. I used to be someone people listened to. He continued. I used to run things, big things, companies, thousands of jobs. Her eyes widened slightly. Yes, he said, cutting her off gently. That. Violet swallowed. Then why were you sitting alone in the hospital like that? He let out a soft, humorless laugh. Because power doesn't last, and reputation disappears even faster. He told her then, slowly, carefully, about the scandal, about refusing to lie, about taking the fall so others could stay clean, about resigning before the world could tear him apart any further. They blamed me for everything, he said. I didn't fight it. I was tired. Violet listened, her heart aching in a new way. She thought of how quickly people had judged her tonight, how easily doors had closed. So you just gave up? She asked softly. He shook his head. No, I stepped aside. I thought maybe the world didn't need me anymore. Violet looked toward the mobile unit, toward her sleeping baby. Well, she said, voice firm, the world needed you tonight. The man's throat tightened. He turned his face away. Sirens faded in the distance. The city was waking up now. Cars passed. Birds began to chirp softly. Inside the unit, the doctor stepped out again. You can come see him? He said to Violet. Just for a moment. Violet stood so fast she nearly stumbled. The man rose too, slower this time, his hand pressing briefly to his chest. Inside, Violet stood beside Benjamin's bed. She brushed her finger over his tiny hand. It curled weakly around hers. I'm here, she whispered. Mama's here. The doctor watched quietly. He's strong, the doctor said. You did the right thing, trusting your instincts. Violet nodded, tears spilling again. Outside, cameras began to appear at the edge of the lot. Reporters, microphones, the glow of headlights. The older man saw them and closed his eyes for a moment. It's starting, he murmured. Violet followed his gaze. What is? The part where people decide what this story means, he said. And who to blame? Violet looked back at Benjamin, then at the man. I don't care what they say, she said. I know the truth. The man met her eyes. Truth has a way of costing people. Violet straightened her shoulders. Then maybe it's worth the price. As dawn broke fully across the sky, Violet held her son's hand and felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there. But hope, real hope, had finally arrived. And somewhere beyond the parking lot, forces were already moving that would test that hope in ways neither of them could yet see. Morning came quietly, as if the night had taken all the noise with it. The sky turned pale pink, then soft blue. Sunlight touched the edge of the mobile unit, warming the cold metal. Violet sat in a chair just inside the doorway, her eyes fixed on Benjamin. She had not slept. She did not want to close her eyes, afraid something might change if she did. Benjamin lay still, tiny chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The machines around him beeped softly now, no longer sharp or urgent. Each sound felt like a small promise. A nurse adjusted a monitor and smiled at Violet. He's holding. Steady, she said. Violet nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She reached out and brushed her finger along Benjamin's arm. His skin felt cooler than before. Not cold, just normal. That alone made her want to cry again. Outside, voices rose, firm, sharp. Violet glanced toward the open door. More hospital staff had gathered. Administrators, security. A few men in suits who did not belong to the night shift. Phones were pressed to ears. Fingers pointed towards the unit. The older man stood a short distance away, speaking calmly to someone on his phone. His posture was straight, but Violet could see the strain in his face. He leaned slightly against the side of the unit when he thought no one was watching. A nurse noticed too. "Sir," she said softly, stepping closer. "You should sit." "I'm fine," he replied. She did not argue. She had learned, like Violet, that some people carried pain quietly. Inside, the doctor came over to Violet. "We've confirmed the infection," he said. It was spreading fast. Another delay would have been dangerous. Violet closed her eyes. Her knees felt weak. "But he's responding." The doctor continued. "We'll keep monitoring him for several hours. If all goes well, we can move him to a regular room later today." "Thank you," Violet whispered. She meant it with every part of her. As the morning stretched on, the parking lot filled with movement. News vans pulled up. Cameras pointed toward the unit. Voices grew louder. Violet felt exposed, like her pain was being put on display. She stepped outside briefly, needing air. The older man stood near the edge of the lot, watching the scene with tired eyes. "I didn't want this," he said quietly, without turning. Violet stood beside him. "Then why do it?" He looked at her. "Because some things matter more than peace?" A reporter shouted a question in their direction. The man ignored it. "They'll twist this," he said. "They always do." Violet lifted her chin. "Let them. My son is alive." The man studied her, something like awe in his eyes. "Where did you learn that kind of strength?" he asked. Violet thought of her grandmother, of long nights, of prayers whispered into darkness. "I didn't," she said simply. "I survived." Inside the unit, Benjamin stirred. Violet rushed back in, heart racing. His eyes fluttered open for a brief second, just long enough for Violet to see them. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, baby." He made a soft sound and closed them again, but Violet felt like she had just seen the sun. The nurse laughed quietly. "That's a good sign." Violet pressed her forehead to Benjamin's hand and cried, silent tears of relief soaking into the blanket. By late morning, the tension outside had grown thicker. A hospital administrator approached the older man again, flanked by legal aides. "This unit will be shut down once the child is stable," the administrator said coldly. "You've caused enough disruption." The man nodded. "As long as the child lives." Violet stepped forward before she could stop herself. "You let him suffer," she said, voice shaking but loud. "You told me to go home." The administrator looked at her like she was a problem to be managed. "This isn't the time," he said. "It was the time last night." Violet replied, "You just didn't care." Silence fell. Cameras caught everything. The administrator turned red and walked away. The older man looked at Violet with surprise. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," Violet said. "I did." As the sun climbed higher, Benjamin's condition continued to improve. The crisis had passed, but the storm around them had not. Violet knew one thing for sure. Saving her son had been the beginning, not the end, and whatever came next would test the courage of everyone involved. By midday, the parking lot no longer felt like a place of rescue. It felt like a stage. News vans lined the curb. Cables snaked across the pavement. Reporters spoke into cameras with serious faces, repeating the same words over and over: unauthorized medical unit, hospital policy, possible violations. Violet heard her story told by strangers who had not been there when she begged for help. Inside the mobile unit, the noise faded. The door stayed mostly closed now, leaving Violet in a quiet pocket of space with Benjamin. The doctor checked his vitals again, nodded with relief, and adjusted a setting on the monitor. "He's improving," he said, slowly but steadily. Violet let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She sank into the chair beside the bed and rested her head against the metal rail. "Thank you, God," she whispered. The doctor smiled. "You can hold his hand. He knows you're here." Violet reached out and wrapped her finger around Benjamin's tiny hand. It squeezed back, weak but real. Her chest filled with warmth so strong it almost hurt. Outside, raised voices broke through the calm. The older man stood facing a small group of hospital officials. One of them spoke sharply, waving a stack of papers. "You don't get to rewrite procedure just because you can afford it." The man snapped. The older man did not raise his voice. "I didn't rewrite anything," he said. "I acted when you refused to." "That refusal was within protocol," the official said. "Protocol doesn't save lives." The older man replied, "People do." The words carried farther than he intended. A nearby microphone picked them up. A reporter's eyes lit up. Violet heard the exchange through the open door. Her stomach twisted. She felt guilt creep in, cold and sharp. If she had not spoken up, if she had not accepted the ride, if she had not trusted a stranger, none of this would be happening to him. The nurse noticed Violet's expression. "Hey," she said softly, "none of this is on you." Violet shook her head. "He did this because of me." "No," the nurse said firmly. "He did it because it was right." Violet looked at Benjamin again. His breathing was easier now. His face, once tight with pain, looked peaceful. She stood and walked outside. The older man turned when he saw her. For a moment his calm slipped. Worry flashed across his face. "Is he?" he asked. "He's better," Violet said quickly. He opened his eyes. The man closed his eyes and nodded, emotion pulling at his mouth. "I'm glad," he said. Violet took a step closer. "They're blaming you." He shrugged. "They always do." "That's not fair," Violet said. "You didn't do anything wrong." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Doing the right thing doesn't protect you from consequences." Violet swallowed. "Then why do it?" He was quiet for a long moment. Cameras rolled. Reporters waited. Finally, he said, "Because I already lost everything once by telling the truth. I won't lose myself too." The words stayed with Violet. Later that afternoon, investigators arrived. Not hospital lawyers, outsiders. They spoke with doctors, with nurses, with security guards who had watched Violet sleep on the floor. One nurse pointed towards the waiting room. "She was there for hours," she said. "Nobody helped her." Violet listened from the doorway, heart pounding. For the first time, people were not just talking about policy. They were talking about her. By early evening, Benjamin was stable enough to be moved into the main hospital under supervision. Violet walked beside the gurney, her hand never leaving his. As they passed through the same doors that had once shut her out, she felt something strange. She felt seen. The older man followed at a distance, his steps slower now. A hand pressed against his side. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. "You should sit," Violet said. He smiled faintly. "Soon." They reached a quiet room. Benjamin was settled into a clean bed with soft sheets. The doctor explained the next steps, then left them alone. Violet sat beside her son and watched him sleep. The older man stood in the doorway. "You don't have to stay," Violet said. "You've done enough." He shook his head. "I want to." She nodded. Night came again. Slower this time. Not rushed, not cruel. But Violet sensed it. The danger had passed. The reckoning had not. And whatever price the older man would be asked to pay for this miracle. It was coming. The second night felt different. The room was dim now, lit by a small lamp near Benjamin's bed. The machines hummed softly, steady and calm. Violet sat in the chair beside him, her shoes kicked off, her feet tucked under her. For the first time in more than a day, her body felt the weight of exhaustion. Benjamin slept deeply, his face relaxed, his tiny chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. Violet watched him like she might forget how if she looked away. A soft knock came at the door. The older man stepped inside. He moved carefully, like each step had to be measured. His jacket was gone now, draped over his arm. Without it, he looked thinner, more human. "They said I could check on him," he said quietly. Violet nodded. "He's doing better." The man walked closer and looked down at Benjamin. A small smile touched his face. "He's strong," he said. Violet folded her hands in her lap. "So are you." He let out a quiet breath. "I don't feel that way." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the room, the hospital was quieter than before. Night staff moved slowly. Voices stayed low. "They're asking questions," the man said at last. "A lot of them." Violet's stomach tightened. "About you?" "And about the hospitals," he replied. "About last night." Violet nodded. "Good." He looked at her with a hint of surprise. "You don't sound worried." "I was worried when my baby couldn't breathe," she said. "Everything else is small compared to that." The man studied her, something like respect in his eyes. "They want to paint me as reckless," he continued. "Someone who used money to break rules." "Did you?" Violet asked. He shook his head. "I used money to save a life." Violet's voice stayed calm, but firm. "Then you did nothing wrong." He looked away, jaw tight. "The world doesn't always agree." Violet reached out and rested her hand lightly on the edge of Benjamin's bed. "The world didn't agree that my son deserved help either." The words hung between them. After a moment, the man sat down in the chair across from her. He exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers to his temple. "I used to believe rules were everything," he said, "that systems worked if you trusted them enough." "And now?" Violet asked. "Now I believe systems need people who are willing to step outside them." Violet smiled faintly. "I think God works that way too." The man glanced at her. "You believe in God?" "I believe I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't," she said. He nodded, thoughtful. "I used to pray, a long time ago." "What happened?" Violet asked gently. He hesitated. "I prayed for justice, and I didn't get it." Violet's eyes softened. "Maybe not yet." The man looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he had forgotten. Outside, footsteps approached. 2 investigators stood at the doorway, their faces serious but not unkind. "We won't keep you long," one said. "We just need to ask a few questions." The man stood slowly. "Of course." They spoke quietly in the hall. Violet could not hear everything, but she caught pieces. Multiple refusals, witnesses, documentation. Her heart pounded. She held Benjamin's hand and prayed again, not just for her son, but for the man who had stepped into her life at the darkest moment. When the man returned, his face looked tired but steady. "They're reopening things," he said. "Not just about last night, about everything." Violet blinked. "Everything?" He nodded. "The scandal, my resignation, all of it." A small smile spread across Violet's face. "Then maybe this wasn't just about my baby." He sat back down, shaken. "Maybe not." The hours passed slowly. Violet dozed in the chair, waking every few minutes to check Benjamin's breathing. Each time, he was still okay. Just before dawn, Benjamin stirred and opened his eyes again. This time, they stayed open. Violet leaned forward. "Hey, sweet boy." Benjamin let out a tiny sound, soft and sleepy. Tears slipped down Violet's face as she laughed quietly. The man stood beside her watching. "He made it," Violet whispered. "Yes," the man said. "He did." Outside, the sky lightened. Somewhere in the hospital, phones rang. Papers were signed. Stories began to change. But in that quiet room, none of that mattered. A baby lived. A mother believed again. And a man who thought he had nothing left to give began to understand that his story was not over yet. Morning returned, but it did not bring peace. Violet woke with a stiff neck and aching shoulders, her head still tilted toward Benjamin's bed. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cutting soft lines across the white walls. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard the machines. She saw the hospital room. She felt the weight rush back in. Benjamin slept quietly, his color better, his breathing calm. Violet stood and stretched, careful not to wake him. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered thanks. Outside the room, voices rose again. Not rushed, not panicked, sharp. Violet stepped into the hallway. A group of hospital administrators stood near the nurses' station, joined now by lawyers in dark suits. Their words were low but intense. One of them noticed Violet and paused. "This area is restricted," he said. "This is my son's room," Violet replied, her voice steady. He frowned but said nothing more. Down the hall, the older man stood with two investigators. His face looked pale, more drawn than before. One hand rested on the wall, steadying himself as he listened. "They're turning this into a spectacle," Violet said softly as she approached him. He gave a small nod. "They always do." One of the investigators glanced at Violet. "You're the mother?" "Yes," Violet said. "We've spoken to several staff members." The investigator said, "Your experience last night is concerning." Violet let out a slow breath. "That's one word for it." The investigator nodded. "There are gaps in the hospital's record. Times don't match. Notes are missing." The older man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "That doesn't surprise me." A lawyer stepped forward, voice tight. "With respect, this is being blown out of proportion. The hospital acted within guidelines." Violet felt heat rise in her chest. "My baby was burning up," she said. "He couldn't breathe. You told me to go home." The lawyer did not look at her. "We sympathize with your fear." "Fear?" Violet repeated. "That wasn't fear. That was reality." Silence followed. Cameras appeared again at the far end of the hall. Reporters whispered. A nurse shook her head as she passed, frustration clear on her face. "This isn't over," the older man said quietly. "Not for me." Violet looked at him. "You regret helping us?" He turned to her, eyes firm. "Never." But she could see it now. The toll, the shallow breathing, the way his hand pressed to his chest again, just for a moment too long. "You're not okay," Violet said. He waved it off. "I've been worse." "Then sit," she said, not asking. He hesitated, then lowered himself into a chair. A nurse approached, concern etched across her face. "Sir, I really think you should be checked." "I'm fine," he said automatically. The nurse did not move. "Please." Violet watched him struggle with the choice. Then he nodded once. "After this," he said. "After I make sure she's protected." The nurse glanced at Violet, then back at him. "We'll be here." The investigators resumed their questions, this time pressing harder. Names were mentioned, dates, previous complaints. Violet listened, heart pounding. This was bigger than her now, bigger than one night. By midday, news alerts buzzed on phones across the floor. Hospital policies under review after emergency refusal. Disgraced executives' actions spark investigation. Violet read the words and felt a strange mix of anger and hope. Inside the room, Benjamin woke and fussed softly. Violet rushed back to him, lifting him carefully. "I've got you," she whispered. He blinked up at her, then rested his head against her shoulder. The door opened again. The older man stood there, breathing carefully. "They're reopening my case," he said. "The old one." Violet froze. "The scandal?" He nodded. "Whistleblowers are talking. They waited until now." Tears filled Violet's eyes. "Because you helped us." "Because I reminded them who they were supposed to be," he said. Violet held Benjamin tighter. That evening, as the sun dipped low again, the pressure reached its peak. Hospital leadership released statements, lawyers argued, the media circled. The older man prepared himself to leave. "They'll try to make this my fault," he said. "Again." Violet shook her head. "You saved my son." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it has to be." He paused at the door and looked back at Benjamin. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a reason." When the door closed behind him, Violet stood alone in the room with her son. Fear still lingered, but now it stood beside something stronger. Truth was moving. And once truth started walking, it did not stop easily. By the time night settled again, the hospital felt different. The hallways were quieter, but the silence was tense, stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. Violet sat beside Benjamin's bed, gently rocking him in her arms. He was awake now, eyes half open, his tiny fingers wrapped around the fabric of her shirt. Each breath he took felt like a gift. She had not let herself relax yet. Not fully. Relief had come in small waves, but fear still lingered in the back of her chest, whispering that things could change, that good moments never stayed long. Outside the room, footsteps echoed. Voices dropped low when they passed her door. Violet caught pieces of conversations without meaning to. Public pressure. Liability. We need to control this. She hated how those words sounded, like her son's life was a problem to be managed. A nurse came in quietly and checked Benjamin's vitals. She smiled this time, not forced, not rushed. "He's doing really well," she said. "If he keeps improving like this, he may not need to stay much longer." Violet nodded, her eyes stinging. "Thank you." The nurse hesitated before leaving. "I'm glad you didn't give up." Violet swallowed. "Me too." When the door closed, Violet leaned her forehead against Benjamin's head and breathed him in. He smelled like clean sheets and baby soap. Normal things. Things she had prayed for. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. News alerts filled it. Unauthorized medical unit sparks nationwide debate hospital under fire for emergency room refusals. Former CEO back in spotlight after overnight rescue. Violet's hands trembled as she locked the screen. Her heart pounded harder than it had when she first arrived at the hospital. This was bigger now, bigger than her fear, bigger than one baby. The door opened again. The older man stepped inside slowly. He looked more worn than earlier, like the day had pressed down on him from all sides. His shoulders were tense. His face was pale. "I didn't want to come in loud," he said softly. Violet looked up. "You're not loud." He smiled faintly and stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "They're not happy," he said. "Anyone upstairs?" Violet adjusted Benjamin in her arms. "Are you in trouble?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask." She studied him closely. The calm she had seen before was still there, but it was thinner now, strained. "You look tired," she said. "I am," he admitted, "but I wanted to see him before anything else happened." Violet nodded and angled Benjamin slightly so the man could see his face. The man's breath caught just a little. "He looks different," he said. "He is," Violet replied. "He's coming back to us." The man closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet. "That's all I needed to know," he said. Violet hesitated, then spoke the thought that had been growing heavier all day. "They're blaming you," she said. He did not deny it. "They always need someone." "That's not right," Violet said. "You did what they refused to do." "Yes," he said, "and that scares people." Violet frowned. "Why?" "Because it reminds them of their own choices," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the machines humming softly between them. Finally, Violet asked, "Do you regret it?" The man shook his head without hesitation. "No, even if they take more from you." He looked at Benjamin. "I had nothing left that mattered until last night." Violet's throat tightened. Footsteps approached quickly this time. 2 hospital administrators stopped just outside the door. One of them knocked, sharp and formal. "May we speak with you?" one asked, looking at the man. The man stood slowly, bracing himself on the chair. "Of course." Violet felt her stomach drop. They moved into the hallway. Violet stayed where she was, heart racing. She could not hear everything, but voices rose and fell. "This was reckless. You bypassed protocol." "The legal exposure." Then the man's voice, calm but firm. "You refused care to a dying child." Silence followed. Violet clutched Benjamin tighter. The administrators walked away stiffly. The man returned to the room, his face unreadable. "They want me gone," he said. "They don't want me anywhere near this anymore." Violet stood up. "Because of me?" "No," he said gently. "Because of them." He paused, then added, "They're threatening charges, civil ones, maybe more." Violet felt a rush of guilt so sharp it made her dizzy. "I never meant—" she began. He raised a hand. "Stop." She froze. "You didn't ask me to do anything," he said. "You asked for help. There's a difference." Tears spilled down Violet's face. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I just wanted my baby to live." The man's voice softened. "And he did." Benjamin stirred, letting out a small sound. Violet kissed his head again and again. Later that evening, investigators returned. This time, they stayed longer. They spoke with Violet directly. "Can you walk us through last night?" one asked gently. Violet told them everything. From the first refusal to sleeping on the floor, from the second hospital to the sirens in the dark. Her voice shook at first. Then it steadied. The investigators listened. They took notes. They asked careful questions. When they left, Violet felt lighter, like a weight had shifted off her shoulders. The man leaned against the wall, breathing slow. "They're taking this seriously," Violet said. He nodded. "Good." Night deepened. The hallway lights dimmed. A nurse came in and smiled. "He's strong enough for you to rest now," she said to Violet. "We'll keep watch." Violet hesitated. Then she nodded. She settled into the chair, Benjamin still in her arms. Her eyes closed just for a moment. The man stood near the door. "You should rest," he said. "So should you," Violet replied. He smiled sadly. "I don't think that's coming tonight." Before he left, he looked back at her one last time. "Whatever happens next," he said, "remember this night." Violet met his gaze. "I will." When the door closed, Violet held her son and let herself cry. Quiet tears this time, filled with relief and fear and hope tangled together. Outside that room, the world was deciding who was right. Inside it, one truth stood firm. A child lived, and no matter what came next, that could never be taken away. Morning arrived slowly, like it was unsure whether it was welcome. Soft light slipped through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the hospital room. Violet woke with a start, her heart racing, her arms tightening around Benjamin before she realized where she was. He was there, warm, breathing. She let out a shaky breath and rested her cheek against his head. His tiny body rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The machines beside his bed hummed quietly, no longer sharp or urgent. For the first time since this nightmare began, Violet allowed herself to believe he might truly be okay. A nurse entered with gentle steps, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," she said softly. "How are we doing?" Violet smiled, small but real. He slept. The nurse nodded as she checked the monitors. He did great overnight. His fever stayed down. Oxygen levels are good. Violet closed her eyes, relief washing through her like warm water. "Thank you," she whispered. The nurse smiled and paused before leaving. "You were very brave." Violet swallowed. "I didn't feel brave. That's usually how it works," the nurse said, then slipped out. The hallway outside buzzed with activity again. Shoes squeaked on tile. Voices overlapped. Papers rustled. Violet sensed the tension before she heard it. She adjusted Benjamin gently into his crib and stepped into the hallway. The older man stood near the nurse's station, surrounded by investigators. He looked thinner than yesterday, like the night had taken something from him. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight, but his eyes were clear. One of the investigators spoke calmly. "We've confirmed several inconsistencies in the hospital's intake records." A hospital lawyer crossed his arms. "Inconsistencies don't prove wrongdoing. They prove omissions," the investigator replied, "and omissions can cost lives." Violet felt her chest tighten. Another investigator turned slightly, noticing her. "You're the mother?" "Yes," Violet said, stepping forward. "We'd like to ask you a few more questions," the investigator said. "If you're willing." Violet nodded. "I am." They moved into a quiet conference room down the hall. Violet sat at the table, hands folded, while Benjamin slept in a bassinet beside her. The investigator's voice was gentle, but firm. "Tell us what happened when you first arrived." Violet told them again, slowly, clearly. From the moment she walked in until she lay on the floor with her baby wrapped in her jacket. She did not raise her voice. She did not exaggerate. She did not cry. She simply told the truth. "When I begged for help," Violet said, her voice steady, "they told me to go home. They never checked his temperature. They never listened to his chest." The investigator nodded and wrote something down. "Did anyone explain why care was refused?" he asked. "They said there were no beds," Violet replied, "but people who came after me were taken back." Silence filled the room. The investigator closed his notebook. "Thank you." When Violet returned to the hallway, the older man looked at her with something close to pride. "You did good," he said quietly. "I just told the truth," Violet replied. "That's harder than it sounds," he said. News spread fast that morning. Nurses whispered to one another, doctors spoke in low voices, phones buzzed with alerts. Hospital under investigation for patient neglect emergency room policies. Questioned after infant case. Multiple staff members come forward. Violet read the headlines on her phone and felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The older man leaned against the wall nearby, breathing carefully. Violet noticed his hand pressed to his chest again. "You're hurting," she said. He gave a tired smile. "Just old bones. Don't lie to me," Violet said gently. He met her eyes. "I won't." He shifted his weight. This stress, it's catching up. A nurse approached immediately. Sir, please, sit down. This time he didn't argue. They guided him into a chair. His face was pale now, sweat shining at his temples. I'm fine, he said again, but his voice was thinner. Violet stood close, worry knotting her stomach. You saved my son, she said. Please don't fall apart now. He smiled faintly. I'll try not to. By midday, the investigation widened. More staff came forward. One nurse admitted she had raised concerns about Violet's baby and been ignored. Another said she had seen similar cases before. Each story added weight. Each truth cracked the wall a little more. Hospital leadership released another statement, this one careful and vague. Violet watched it on the small TV in her room. We take all patient concerns seriously. She turned it off. Inside the room, Benjamin woke and fussed. Violet lifted him gently and held him close. His eyes were brighter now. Curious. Hey, she whispered. You scared Mama. He blinked and reached up, touching her chin with clumsy fingers. Tears filled Violet's eyes again. You're still here, she said softly. You stayed. That afternoon, a doctor entered with a smile. He's doing so well, he said. If everything stays stable, we can discharge him tomorrow. Violet gasped. Tomorrow? The doctor nodded. You'll need to come back for follow-ups, but the worst has passed. Violet sank into the chair, overwhelmed. Later, the older man came by again. His color had returned slightly, though he moved more slowly now. They reopened my case, he said quietly. Violet looked up. The scandal? Yes, he replied. They found evidence that was buried. Emails. Testimony. Violet's mouth fell open. Because of this? He nodded. Because people remembered what courage looks like. She smiled through tears. Then maybe this pain meant something. The man looked at Benjamin. It already did. As evening approached, reporters waited outside the hospital doors. The story had grown beyond control. The older man prepared to leave. They don't want me here anymore, he said calmly. Too much attention. Violet stood. Thank you, she said, for everything. He hesitated, then reached out and gently touched Benjamin's foot. Thank you, he replied. You reminded me why truth matters. As he turned to go, Violet called after him. What if they come after you again? He paused. Then they'll have to face the truth too. That night, Violet sat beside her son, the room quiet once more. Fear still lived in her chest, but now it shared space with something new. Justice was moving, and this time it wasn't walking past her. It was walking with her. The day Benjamin was discharged began with rain. It tapped softly against the hospital windows, slow and steady, like a quiet reminder that the world kept moving no matter what happened inside its walls. Violet stood at the window holding Benjamin against her chest, watching the drops slide down the glass. Looks like you're going home, little man, she whispered. Benjamin stirred, his eyes half open, his body warm and relaxed. He felt heavier than he had days ago, stronger, alive in a way Violet had almost been afraid to believe. A nurse entered with a clipboard and a gentle smile. Vitals look great, she said. Doctor will be in soon with discharge papers. Violet nodded, her throat tight. Thank you. As the nurse left, Violet pressed her cheek to Benjamin's head and closed her eyes. She had walked into this hospital terrified, invisible, desperate. She was walking out changed. The door opened again, this time with purpose. 2 investigators stepped inside, their expressions calm but serious. We won't keep you long, one said. We wanted to update you. Violet shifted Benjamin slightly. Okay. The review has expanded. The investigator continued. It's no longer just about your son. Violet felt a slow chill. What do you mean? We've uncovered a pattern, he said. Multiple cases of delayed or denied care. Some of them going back years. Violet's stomach tightened. She thought of other mothers, other babies. Will anything actually change? She asked quietly. The investigator met her eyes. It already is. After they left, Violet sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. She looked at Benjamin's face, peaceful and unaware. You were the spark, she whispered. You shouldn't have had to be. By mid-morning, the hallway buzzed again. Nurses whispered. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. Phones rang non-stop. Violet heard footsteps and looked up. The older man stood in the doorway. He looked different, straighter, calmer. Still tired, but lighter somehow, like a weight had begun to lift. They cleared part of it, he said quietly. Violet's heart skipped. Cleared what? The scandal, he replied. Not fully yet, but enough. He stepped inside and sat across from her. They found emails, he continued. Records that show I refused to sign off on false reports, that I warned them, that I walked away. Violet smiled, slow and full. So the truth came out. Yes, he said, and it's loud. She laughed softly. Good. Outside the room, voices rose as a television in the hallway played breaking news. Former executive's resignation re-examined whistleblowers come forward. After infant care case, hospital leadership faces accountability. Violet listened, holding Benjamin tighter. I didn't want any of this, she said. The man nodded. Neither did I. A doctor entered then, smiling broadly. You're all set, he said. Benjamin is cleared to go home. Violet's breath caught. Thank you. The doctor handed her papers and explained the follow-up care. Violet listened carefully, nodding at each instruction. She had learned how fast things could change. When the doctor left, Violet gathered Benjamin's things slowly. Each movement felt unreal. You're really coming home, she said, smiling through tears. The older man stood. I'll walk you out. They moved through the hall together. Nurses smiled at Violet now. Some nodded. One whispered, I'm glad he's okay. Violet nodded back, gratitude filling her chest. As they reached the front doors, the noise hit them. Cameras, microphones, reporters calling out questions. Mom, how do you feel now? Sir, do you regret your actions? Was hospital bias a factor? The older man stepped slightly in front of Violet without touching her, shielding her with his presence. No questions today, he said firmly. They walked past the crowd and into the rain. Violet stopped just outside the doors. She turned to him, emotion flooding her face. I don't know how to thank you, she said. He shook his head. You don't have to. Yes, she said. I do. She looked down at Benjamin, then back at the man. You saw us, she said, when no one else did. His eyes softened. I saw myself. They stood there for a moment as the rain fell around them. I'm starting something, he said quietly. Mobile units, permanent ones, for places that turn people away. Violet's breath caught. Because of him? Because of you both, he said. She smiled. Then this really wasn't just pain. No, he said. It was purpose. A car pulled up to take Violet home. She hesitated before stepping inside. What happens now? She asked. The man looked toward the crowd, then back at her. Now, he said, the truth finishes its work. Violet nodded. She climbed into the car and settled Benjamin in her arms. As the car pulled away, she looked back through the rain-streaked window. The older man stood alone, facing the cameras. But this time, he was not bowed. He was ready. At home that evening, Violet laid Benjamin in his crib. The apartment felt smaller than before, but warmer too. Safer. She sat beside the crib and watched him sleep. Outside, sirens passed. News spread. Systems shook. Inside, Violet rested her hand on her son's chest and felt his steady breathing. "We made it," she whispered. And for the first time since the night everything began, Violet believed it. Not just hoped. Believed. The next morning, the rain was gone. Sunlight poured through Violet's thin curtains, bright and plain, like nothing bad had ever happened. For a moment, she lay still on her couch and listened. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sounds of Benjamin breathing in his crib. That sound made her chest loosen. Violet rose slowly, her body sore in places she didn't even remember straining. She padded into the bedroom and leaned over the crib. Benjamin blinked up at her, calm and sleepy. His cheeks looked fuller already. His eyes were clear. "Good morning, little warrior," Violet whispered. Benjamin kicked one foot and made a small, happy sound. Violet laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that came from deep relief, not humor. She lifted him gently and held him against her shoulder. His warmth felt normal now, safe. Violet carried him to the kitchen and warmed a bottle. As she fed him, she watched his little mouth move. She watched his eyelids droop. She watched him trust the world again. And that trust broke her heart in the best way. When Benjamin finished, Violet sat him upright and burped him softly. He gave a tiny hiccup and then rested his head on her chest like he belonged there forever. Violet's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and froze. More alerts. Hospital places senior leaders on leave after investigation, emergency refusal reports, spark statewide review, former CEO's name cleared in reopened corporate case. Violet's breath caught. She read the last headline again, slower this time, as if the words might change. Name cleared. A sound left her throat that was half laugh and half sob. She pressed a hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. "Lord," she whispered. "You did it." Benjamin squirmed a little, and Violet kissed his forehead. "You hear that?" she said softly. The truth caught up. She set Benjamin in his swing near the living room window. The sunlight lit his face and made him look even more alive. Violet turned on the small TV, keeping the volume low. A news anchor spoke with a serious face. Behind her, a picture flashed on the screen of the hospital entrance. Then another image. An older man standing near cameras, his posture calm, his eyes tired but steady. The anchor's voice continued. Officials confirmed that new evidence has cleared the former executive of wrongdoing in the earlier scandal. Investigators say whistleblowers have provided documentation that contradicts previous public claims. Violet felt her chest tighten. She didn't like seeing him on a screen like that. Not as a headline. Not as something people could twist and chew up. She remembered the way he had looked in the parking lot, pale and strained, still choosing to stand. Violet turned the TV off. She didn't need strangers to tell her who he was. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a call. A number she didn't recognize. Violet hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Ms. Violet?" A calm voice asked. "This is Investigator Harris. We spoke yesterday." Violet straightened. "Yes. I wanted to let you know the hospital's internal review has escalated," he said. "There will be formal consequences. Some policies are being changed immediately." Violet's hand tightened around the phone. "So this won't just disappear?" "No," the investigator said. "Not this time." Violet swallowed hard. "Good." He paused. "Also, your statement helped. It gave us clarity." Violet looked at Benjamin, who was calmly chewing on his fist, unaware of the storm he had started. I'm glad, she said quietly. I don't want anyone else to go through that. We don't either, the investigator replied. We'll keep you updated, and if you need anything, call us. After the call ended, Violet sat down on the edge of her couch. She stared at the wall for a long moment, letting everything settle. Her baby was alive. The system was being forced to look at itself. And the man who saved them, his name was finally being lifted out of the dirt. Violet whispered a prayer of thanks again, slow and steady. But gratitude wasn't the only thing she felt. She felt a pull, a need. She needed to see him, not on a screen, not as a headline, as a person. Around noon, Violet bundled Benjamin in his blue jacket and stepped outside for fresh air. The sun felt warm on her face. The day felt normal, and that almost made her cry again. Normal had felt impossible just days ago. She walked to the corner store and bought a small bouquet of cheap flowers, white daisies, simple and bright. The cashier smiled at Benjamin. He's cute, she said. Violet smiled back. He's a miracle. On the walk home, Violet's neighbor, an older woman from down the hall, stepped out with a grocery bag. Violet? The woman asked, eyes wide. Honey, I saw the news. Violet's stomach tightened. You did? The woman nodded, her face soft with concern. They showed the hospital. They talked about what happened to your baby. Violet's cheeks warmed. Part embarrassment, part anger, part something else. I'm sorry, Violet said quickly. I didn't want— Oh, no! The woman interrupted, stepping closer. Don't you apologize for surviving, you hear me? Violet blinked. The woman reached out and touched Benjamin's blanket gently. I'm just glad he's okay. Violet swallowed. Thank you. The woman leaned in and lowered her voice. And that man, the one who helped, folks are calling him all kinds of things. But I saw his eyes on TV. He looked like a man who finally remembered how to be good. Violet's throat tightened again. That's exactly what he is. Back inside the apartment, Violet put Benjamin down for a nap. He fell asleep quickly, full and warm. Violet stood by the crib for a long moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. Then she made a decision. She picked up her phone and scrolled until she found the number the older man had given the nurse. An assistant's line, left quietly, like he wasn't sure she would ever use it. Violet stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. What do you even say to someone who saved your child? Thank you felt too small. God bless you felt too simple. I'm sorry felt wrong. She pressed call. After a few rings, a woman answered. Hello? Violet cleared her throat. Hi, my name is Violet. I'm calling about the man who helped my baby at the hospital. There was a brief pause. Then the woman's tone shifted, careful and kind. Yes, Mom. I know who you mean. Violet swallowed. I want to speak with him, or see him, if he's okay. The woman hesitated. He's been dealing with a lot today. I understand. Violet said quickly. I don't want to add pressure, I need him to know what he did mattered. The woman's voice softened. It did matter. Another pause. Then, he has a small office downtown now, not the big place he used to have. If you'd like, I can pass along a message. Violet's chest tightened. Could you tell him? Violet and Benjamin are home. Benjamin is safe. And Violet wants to thank him in person, if he'll allow it. The woman exhaled gently, like she was touched. Yes, Mum. I'll tell him. Violet hesitated. Will you ask if he's— Okay. The woman was quiet for a beat. He's tired, but he's standing. Violet closed her eyes. That sounds like him. After the call ended, Violet sat on the couch with her hands in her lap. She stared at the daisies on her table, Her baby had been saved, but she could feel something else now, something deeper than relief. A door had opened in her life, a door made of compassion, and she didn't want it to close without honoring it. That evening, Benjamin woke and babbled softly while Violet warmed his bottle. She fed him slowly, smiling at his little noises, at the way he studied her face like he was learning her all over again. Afterward, she held him close and walked around the room, humming a simple tune her grandmother used to hum. "Tomorrow," Violet whispered to Benjamin, "we're going to see the man who helped us." Benjamin yawned and rested his head against her shoulder. Violet looked out the window at the quiet street below. Cars passed. Lights flickered on in other apartments. Life continued. And yet, Violet felt like she had stepped into a new world. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew she could not leave this story unfinished, not without saying goodbye the right way, not without letting gratitude land where it belonged. The next morning, the air felt different. Violet stood by the window, holding Benjamin in her arms, watching the world outside wake up. The city, still damp from the rain the night before, was full of quiet moments. People walking to work, cars passing by, the soft rustle of leaves in the trees. For the first time in a while, Violet could breathe without a weight on her chest. She turned back to Benjamin, who was awake now, his eyes bright and full of curiosity. His small hand gripped her finger, and she smiled, brushing his hair away from his forehead. "You're getting stronger," she whispered, her voice full of hope. Benjamin cooed in response, his little body squirming with excitement. His progress was everything to her, and every moment felt like a precious victory. She placed him in his crib gently, watching as he settled back to sleep. Her phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it, expecting another news update or call from the hospital. But instead, it was a message from the assistant. "He's free to meet today. He wants to see you both." Violet stared at the message for a long moment, her heart racing. It had been a week since the older man's help, since he had saved her son's life, and she had spent the days since replaying every conversation, every look, wondering if what had happened between them was as meaningful as it had seemed. The man was more than just the one who had intervened. He had shown her that even in a world of broken systems, there could still be kindness, still be action, still be change. She hadn't forgotten that. And now, here was the chance to thank him, to see him again, away from the chaos and the cameras, to understand him a little more, who he was and why he had risked so much. She typed a quick reply. "We'll be there. Thank you." Violet got Benjamin ready, dressing him in a simple onesie and wrapping him in a warm blanket. She wasn't sure what she'd say to the man. She wasn't sure if words would ever be enough. But she knew she couldn't let this go unsaid. Not now, not after everything he had done for her family. The cab ride to his office felt longer than it should have. Benjamin slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the weight of the day ahead. Violet gazed out the window, watching the world go by. Her thoughts circled around the older man. How did he feel, knowing that his actions had set in motion something much bigger than either of them? She didn't know what to expect when they arrived. She had seen him in the hospital, surrounded by the sterile environment, but this would be different. This was his space, his world, a place where he no longer carried the title of executive, but simply was who he chose to be. The cab pulled up outside a small building downtown. It was not much to look at, simple, quiet, but something about it felt right. A place where people didn't care about titles or positions, just people. Violet stepped out, holding Benjamin close to her chest as she walked up the stairs. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. "Violet." The older man greeted her, his face lighting up with a quiet smile. He looked a little better than the last time she had seen him. The exhaustion was still there, but there was a strength in his eyes now. He stepped aside to let them in. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low but warm. Violet nodded, stepping inside. The office was simple but comfortable. There were no fancy decorations or signs of corporate life, just a desk, a few chairs, and shelves filled with books. It felt like a place where the man could breathe, where he didn't have to pretend. "I didn't know what to expect," Violet said, looking around. The man gave a small, knowing smile. "Neither did I." He motioned for her to sit. Violet carefully lowered herself into a chair, keeping Benjamin close. The man sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk. "I've been thinking about what happened," Violet said softly, breaking the silence. "About everything. And I realize now that what you did, it wasn't just about saving my son's life. It was about saving all of us." The man looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze. "I didn't do it for recognition, Violet. I did it because it was right." "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you could have walked away. You didn't have to step in. You didn't have to risk everything." He exhaled slowly, as if weighing his words. "I had nothing left to lose, but I knew that if I didn't help, I would lose more than I had already lost." Violet looked at him closely. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I have something I didn't expect. I have a chance to make a real difference, and that means more than anything else." Violet nodded, understanding more than she had before. "You're not alone in this. You've inspired people. You've reminded us all that it's okay to stand up, even when it's hard." The man looked at her, his expression softening. "I didn't expect you to say that." She smiled, a real smile this time, filled with appreciation. "You saved my son, and in doing that, you saved me. You reminded me that I don't have to fight this world alone." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, like two people who had finally understood what it meant to trust. Finally, the man stood. "I'll make sure you're kept updated on everything. There's still a long road ahead." Violet stood too, Benjamin still resting in her arms. "I'm not afraid of the road anymore, not if we're walking it with purpose." He nodded, his eyes steady. "Neither am I." As they walked towards the door, Violet turned one last time to face him. "Thank you for everything." He smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't about gratitude but understanding. "You don't need to thank me. We've already thanked each other." With that, she stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Benjamin woke in her arms as they made their way back to the street, his eyes blinking in the light. Violet kissed his forehead, holding him close. The world hadn't been kind to either of them, but they had found kindness in the most unexpected place. And now, with the truth on their side, Violet felt like they could walk forward, no longer invisible, no longer silent. The road ahead was theirs to create, and no matter where it led, they were ready to face it, together. Weeks passed, but it felt like everything had changed. The dust settled on the investigation. The hospital made public statements promising reforms. The media shifted focus to the real story, the people behind the headlines. Nurses, doctors, patients, all stood up, revealing a truth that had been ignored for too long. Violet stood in front of her small apartment window one afternoon, watching the world move outside. Benjamin played quietly in his crib, his tiny hands reaching for a toy. She could hardly believe how much had shifted since that dark night in the hospital. It felt like an eternity ago, yet the weight of it still lingered. The older man's name was cleared, his reputation slowly restored. He'd started a new initiative, mobile medical units to serve underserved communities, a permanent reminder of the power of one person's action. Violet thought about him often, not as the man who saved her son, but as someone who reminded her that there was still goodness in the world. She could never forget the lesson he had taught her. The sun set behind the city, casting a warm glow over everything. And for the first time in a long time, Violet felt like she could breathe easy. The city was quieter now, the morning sun casting soft light across the streets. The chaos of the past weeks had faded, but its impact lingered in the stillness. Violet sat by the window, Benjamin resting comfortably in her arms, his small hand wrapped around her finger. It had been months since that life-changing night in the hospital, and every moment since had been a reminder of how fragile life was, and how resilient the human spirit could be. Benjamin's laughter filled the room, a sound that was now a regular melody in their home. His health had improved beyond what the doctors expected, and with each milestone, Violet's hope grew stronger. She looked out at the world beyond, a world that had once felt too heavy to carry. There had been pain, there had been fear, but there had also been moments of unimaginable kindness. People who stepped forward, not because they had to, but because it was the right thing to do. The older man's initiative was growing. His mobile medical units were changing lives, reaching communities that had been ignored for too long. And in a strange way, Violet felt that the ripple he started with one act of compassion was now touching lives far beyond her own. She smiled as Benjamin reached for a stuffed bear, his giggle filling the room. "Look at you," she whispered. "You're perfect." For the first time in a long time, Violet didn't feel the weight of what had happened. She had lived through the worst, and she had come out the other side stronger. The future no longer felt uncertain. It felt full of possibility. And she knew in her heart that whatever came next, whatever obstacles or challenges lay ahead, she and Benjamin would face it together. With hope, with love, and with the knowledge that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. "Together, little one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart